Hello and welcome to a presentation for our carers and parents of our pupils in Year 11 who are supporting the children through Year 11 examinations. Obviously a difficult time, but as we come to the end of a really hectic term, I'd like to share the information that we have been working with the pupils all throughout the term, and obviously transferring the information to yourselves through different newsletters. Really difficult at this time of year to get that message across, as we would usually welcome you into school on a number of occasions by now. This first slide explains where we're up to in terms of our assessment and monitoring. So the pupils had the October monitoring, which demonstrated how they had returned to their lessons. We wanted to do that as an early start to indicate any issues or problems that needed addressing early on in the autumn term. From November, from the 9th to the 20th, they had in-class assessments, which we said they were mini mocks. We tried to promote those and make sure that the pupils were preparing themselves, getting them ready at this early stage to make sure that their revision was efficient and they prepared themselves as fully as they possibly could do. The pupils were excellent at the way they took part in those assessments, and the vast majority really took them very seriously and as a consequence have received very good grades. Those grades will be reported at the end of this week through the progress tracking update, and again that will indicate on using GCSE grades either through the 9 to 1 scale or the vocational pass merit distinctions, but also we will also include a monitoring update. So if there were any issues or any problems within classes that was brought up in October, then we can hopefully identify and hope that those have been addressed by now. And obviously at this stage we'd want to make sure that all our pupils are working properly, efficiently, and gearing themselves up for what is likely to be quite a long year and very likely to be a very difficult year. The middle of the next term, we plan to have our mock week, so that will be a full mock window, and we've put that either side of half term to give the pupils a chance to really prepare fully and give themselves a chance with some of the later exams and give them time to prepare during that half term. So half the exams will be in the first week. They'll then have we're calling it a study week, but they'll have the week of half term, and then they'll return to the second week. And again, we try to balance those exams across both weeks, and obviously using the morning sessions normally for the larger exams and the afternoon sessions more often for some of the smaller cohort examinations and option subjects. Immediately after that mock window, we will generate the report, and that'll be a full written report, an opportunity for staff to report back comments individual to each child, and we'll back that up afterwards with a parents' evening, which is very, very likely to be a virtual online event, but again a chance for parents to ask the questions that they want to ask subject staff, and we're looking for that to be on or around the 25th of March, but obviously we'll confirm those details nearer the time. We do now know that the government are intending to hold a full exam season from the 26th of May till the 2nd of July, and that falls the English, Maths and Health and Social Care exams just before half term on that 26th, 27th, 28th of May, and then the vast majority of the examinations will be when the pupils return after half term throughout June and obviously the very, very start of July, with the intention that the results will be at the normal time towards the end of summer in August. The information that we have now received from government gives us some indication of the changes which the pupils will have in their favour. Some of the things that the government will be putting in place to try and ensure the outcomes are fair for pupils this year and also in future years and previous years. So the most important statement that came in the statement from Gavin Williamson last week was that the intention is to maintain the national outcomes at least in line with the 2020 cohort, so our Year 11 pupils won't be disadvantaged against last year's Year 11 for the centre assessed grades. We do feel that there is still a lot of work to be done in making sure that is the case, where pupils have experienced individually a number of weeks away from their studies through isolation. But that again, the final point on the slide there does indicate that the government have got an intention to work towards working through some idea of parity between different areas of the country, but also more localised context in terms of pupils that have experienced greater time away from their studies. We do also know that there is likely to be some areas of pupils being aware of topics Some subjects have already had different topic and units removed, like for example in history, but that it is likely that we're going to receive information regarding some topics that pupils can plan for more heavily with more knowledge that they will definitely be part of the examinations. And also formula sheets, exam aids are likely to be provided in certain subjects. Again, there is more detail needed before we can explain that in greater depth. Importantly, there is also the option, and we have been challenged to prepare for an additional exam season after the June-July summer exams, and that is to allow what we think will be a small number of children who may miss an assessment due to illness or self-isolation. So again, many more points to come and be explained on that, but as soon as we know more information, we'll try and pass that on to you and prepare our pupils for that. Some of the common concerns that the pupils often tell us they have regarding their revision and therefore their exams is the amount of material that they obviously have to learn, and that they often find that they don't start on time, they leave it too late, that the techniques that they use don't help them enough, and the anxiety that builds in a normal year, never mind one that's likely to be affected by COVID and exam changes, are all things that we can try and help the pupils get into a pattern of early revision and preparation to ensure that when the time comes, that many of the common concerns that would affect them had they not done so are actually started to be reduced as they value the amount of work that they've done to put them in their positive position, ready to do their best in their exams. We've talked a lot to pupils about developing their long-term memory, about storing more and more information that can be easily accessed in their long-term memory. We know that long-term memory can have an infinite amount of information in it, but obviously building the quality of that information and ensuring that they're able to access it and retrieve it is something that can be practiced and can be prepared for, and obviously the longer and more time they commit to that process, the more effectively they will be able to recall that information. And the diagrams we tend to use are similar to the ones on the screen there, whereby people may recall one or two key facts but very little about it, as opposed to a different pupil who's able to recall the key facts but also elaborate on each of those facts and remember the detail that goes with it. And clearly when it comes to the longer mark questions, which all of our pupils will face in the summer, being in a position of being able to recall vast amounts of information but also more accurately and more efficiently is always going to help them in their exams. The two graphs on screen indicate what we've explained to the pupils about how likely it is for them to start to forget work, how quickly they forget work, if they don't spend some time revising it and retrieving it, using that information, and again storing and strengthening the long-term memory. The graph on the top left indicates what evidence has shown to be how quickly information is lost, with errors started to be brought into the work if you don't spend any time reviewing and retrieving that information. So the blue line demonstrates that over the course of the first week, first few days and weeks, most of the information that you've learned for the first time is lost if you don't spend any time thinking about it again. The graph on the right, bottom right, indicates that if you do have a revision schedule where you've got a good plan and you go back and you look at the key points, you review the lessons that you've done, you think back to how you did an equation or some key points in a science or geography or a different option subject, if you go back and you review those points and you think about those key points, then that long-term memory is strengthened, but not only do you remember more about the topic, but you're able to bring that memory back into your brain and obviously use it under examination conditions. So the work that we're trying to do with the pupils is about thinking about how they can plan ahead, make sure that they start their revision in plenty of time, give themselves plenty of time to keep reviewing the material and keep strengthening those links that they've got in their brains to make sure that they're storing the information in the first place, but also able to retrieve it more strongly over time. This year we've been looking at different types of revision techniques and things that we can promote with the pupils that are likely to be really effective in terms of making sure the time that they have to revise is used effectively and efficiently. And while pupils will often say that they enjoy different types of techniques, we've tried to say to them, let's try and focus on the ones which are likely to have the most benefit. So this table demonstrates common revision techniques, and some of the ones which pupils will often revert back to are actually been proven to be some of the least effective. So typically pupils will reread material, reread it again, building up a familiarity with a text, with certain materials, but over time that's shown to be ineffective in terms of how much they're actually detail they're remembering and able under exam conditions to relate to the exam questions. As it's highlighting, underlining or summarising in terms of whole portions of text, again, a technique which is obviously better than nothing, but is not the best techniques that they can be using. So there are different techniques within this table, and I'm going to go through a number of them later. But some of the things that we will always come back to is the ideas that we want the pupils to be working over time with a distributed practice, making sure that they have that idea from the previous slide, going back to materials, going back to it, looking at it again, finding out what they do, what they don't know, and obviously focusing their time in the things that they are having the most difficulty with. But also the practice testing has been the number one item and technique that we'd like them to focus on, so that all of their revision sessions have some element of testing, some element of seeing and putting themselves under exam conditions. What do they know? What can they recall? How complete an answer can they produce? So again, as we go through the information, the remaining part of the presentation, some of the techniques we'll show will be how that they can use the practice testing and the distributed practice to really make sure that their revision is as efficient as possible, and make sure that they can find a balance in all through their activities in Year 11. We don't want them to stop doing activities because they've got revision to do. We want them to make sure that wherever possible they take part in all their activities that they enjoy. But when they do commit to revision, we want it to be high quality, and we want to make sure they get the most from it from the time that they put in. The following slides are all part of a document that I gave to the Year 11s a couple of weeks ago during a study session, and it itemises different techniques and revision principles, ideas that the pupils can do to break up their revision, do different topics, different techniques for different things. And I've just colour coded it to explain where the colours relate to items in the previous slides. So everywhere that you see a green dot relates to some idea of trying to turn something into a quiz or into a test, or into some idea of actually noting how well they've done in terms of what they were able to reproduce or answer. So the first thing that we've tried to explain to the pupils is that to use a simple effective quiz, this could clearly be labelling a diagram or what do they know relating to their content of their work, but working through the ideas of what do they know, what did they get correct, what did they miss out and get wrong, and particularly in terms of distribution, it's about testing themselves after a couple of days, 5 days, 2 weeks, a month, increasing the frequency if they find that they're not remembering that information, reducing the frequency of those tests on that particular topic if they find that they're able to retrieve that information really well. So simple things that they can do will be as simple as look at their notes, really struggle to remember those notes, try and work through those notes, and then cover the notes and actually write out the notes as they want to remember them. Simply testing themselves, what were they able to get down, what did they forget, and we'd encourage them to make any corrections in a different colour, or maybe using a bold or italics, and just to really iterate what was it I got wrong, what is it the same thing that I got wrong each time. But again, just coming back to this idea of what do I know from my notes, and what, more importantly, what do I not know. One of the key topics in terms of producing notes and making sure that those notes are presentable is around summarising. And again, we said to the pupils that particularly for things like strengths and weaknesses, advantages, disadvantages, positives and negatives, it's a really idea to summarise their notes into a table or onto flashcards or mind maps. And that key ability to summarise is really important. The reason that we've put it into the table with the green dot again is about the summary. It is absolutely superb. It's great that they go through their notes and they summarise it, but a little bit like rereading, although that can make the content more familiar, it doesn't necessarily tell them what they do or don't know. So once they've summarised that material, and we'd ask them to spend a short amount of time summarising, getting the detail from their notes, the key point is about can they recall it, can they test themselves, and can they reproduce that summary, can they reproduce the table or the mind map or the flashcards, and we'll go through some of those now in a little bit more detail. The first one being mind maps, where the pupils tend to have, over maybe 5 years or even greater, developed quite a good ability to mind map. And one of the things that they often forget to do is to start with a blank piece of paper, to use the whole of that piece of paper to elaborate and make sure that they add the detail for the exam notes. and then go back and find what they've forgotten. So one of the key things we said to the pupils when they're using a mind map technique is, first of all, make sure they've got plenty of space to pull out the most important concepts first, but to elaborate on those concepts and make sure that they detail a full answer. And that really comes the crucial part in terms of the testing of the mind maps, which is about, can they then cover it up and can they reproduce it? When they look at what they can reproduce, what have they missed out? And again, we'd look at them to have that idea around corrections, putting in the bits in bold text or in capital letters, the bits that they got wrong. And again, as they continue to mind map and they mind map the same topics, get more confident, we ask them to annotate it with some doodles or diagrams. Again, very short, quick things to do that just make sense to them. Little doodles that add to their notes and add to the mind map and helps trying to put in a different context. So again, use of colour, use of space, but the key principle around all mind mapping is, can they cover it up and can they produce the different key strands and can they produce it in its entirety? One of the things that is really useful to do is, and it will become apparent throughout these slides, is actually to discuss it, to be able to talk it through, to be able to verbalise it and obviously talk it through to somebody. And again, where parents can and older brothers and sisters can be a great help in having the mind map in front of them and encouraging the Year 11 pupils to actually explain it and talk it through. Rather than just always writing things down. So an interesting way of maybe asking them to write it down and then ask them to talk it through, and by doing both they really strengthen that long-term memory. A technique which builds on the spoken or verbal aspect of revision is around tell the story, where a pupil will write out a story or the key points of a story, focus on those key words, those key points, and build them into a version of a story that they can actually speak, talk through, and every time they rehearse it they add more detail and more accuracy. And this can be particularly useful when you're trying to remember maybe historical facts or geography. You've got the water cycle in the picture there, whereby the key points can often be spoken through very quickly, but by starting from scratch each time and adding more detail, you build that complexity. And again, we've encouraged the pupils to have a go at these tasks as something that's a little bit different, maybe a different style to the way they would normally revise. But for certain aspects, it can be very useful to make sure that not only do they remember the key points by making sure they're parts of the key parts of the story, but by actually explaining those keywords in detail and putting it into language, they're able to make sure they add more detail and accuracy to that. So tell the story is an excellent technique that they might want to try and use for certain aspects of their revision. Another one is the brain dump. Obviously, quite simple as it says, set time limit. 5 or 10 minutes would be a really suitable amount of time depending on the length of the topic. But very simply, they just close the book and they write out everything that they can possibly remember about that topic. And again, rather than a mind map or a flashcard or tell a story where it's very detailed and would follow one thing after another, the brain dump is simply about engaging the brain in terms of the long-term memory and trying to really struggle to remember the next important theme or concept. So quite often in a brain dump activity, the pupil will write out the same key things first, the things that they remember really strongly, but it's in that last few minutes of the activity where they're really struggling to remember something else. What else do they know about that topic, where they really do some really great learning and build about learning that content for future reference. So again, things that will help and improve that technique is about making sure they set themselves a time limit, that they start on a new line, make sure that they have got a great presentation. But key, absolutely fundamental, the testing element comes back to looking back at the end of that 5-10 minutes. What was it they wrote down? They're the things that they definitely know or that they've got a really good grip of. And then what is it that's left in their notes that they didn't remember that they will try and focus on next time and make sure that that's part of the content that they are able to retrieve next time that they do a similar brain dump. And again, that could be something that they do at the beginning of a revision session or maybe towards the end. But again, a great activity just to write absolutely everything they can possibly remember. It can come out in any order, but it's great to go through at the end of it and test what it is that they forgot or what they failed to remember. When we come on to flashcards, again, we spent a lot of time with the pupils looking at flashcards as a key one, and the reason being that the pupils do really enjoy using flashcards generally. So some will say that it's not for them, and that's absolutely fine if they're using other techniques which are useful. But flashcards generally are used by pupils very strongly, and they spend a lot of time with them. So we've spent some time building flashcards, trying to make sure that they are used effectively. So we've looked at what goes into a flashcard, summarising the content effectively, looking at make sure that the name or the unit topic is on the back of the card, clearly using some colour or some great presentation to not put too much information on the card. But more importantly, thinking about how they use the flashcard. So the actual summarising of the information and the making of the flashcard becomes less important, just making sure that there's some simple, effective flashcards. And the key point then is obviously how they use them. So some of the things that we've asked them to do, again, is obviously just simple things like shuffling them to make sure they're not always in the same order, about making sure that they go through and they look at maybe the word, the unit on the back, and can they reiterate the information, can they write out the information or speak the information to somebody else. But it's this idea constantly about testing themselves with their flashcards and using different techniques to think, right, rather than just make the flashcards, it's about actually using the flashcards to test themselves and put themselves under pressure. If the flashcards are well produced with clear information, with the unit the unit topic on the front and the information on the reverse, then we can use those flashcards in a number of different ways and try and build up either working on their own independently or maybe with a friend or a parent to help them. And the first technique that we looked at with the Year 11s was using the Leitner system, whereby flashcards are put into different boxes depending on how confident they are with each flashcard. So for example, a series of flashcards on a unit of science, there may be some of those flashcards where the pupil thinks, right, yeah, I really understand that information and I've tested myself and I can see that I'm able to produce the entire flashcard absolutely perfectly. That can go into a box that moves down the line, whereby it needs obviously checking maybe once every 2 weeks. Whereas a flashcard where a pupil consistently has difficulty remembering, they struggle to remember the information, or they only partially remember the information, that needs to be moved up a box to something that maybe is looked at either every alternate day, or potentially if they're really struggling, that needs to go into a box that's checked every day. So again, particularly as we get nearer the examination time, we're looking to make sure we focus the revision on the things that they're forgetting, the flashcards, the parts of the units that they're struggling with, and the really key content that they're forgetting regularly. And again, that's really building that long-term memory, looking back at all the material eventually over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, but really focusing on the information that they really need to develop and make sure they understand. So again, using that Leitner system, it sort of separates, rather than going through all of the flashcards in their set, they will focus and target their revision much more specifically. We've talked about the fact that maybe breaking up their revision into chunks or into periods of time with those short breaks, but then changing the type of revision that they're doing or the focus of their revision. And again, the process that we call interleaving, just trying to build up a pattern of difference in their revision, like they're going to get in the exam season when they have different exams on different days, particularly in the mock exams, where they quite quickly will have maybe 2 exams in the same day and many exams over a short period of time. So just building up their ability to focus on different subjects, different types of work, different subjects in a short space of time. And if I could finish with a couple of points about in terms of effectiveness and revision, and hopefully support some of the perhaps arguments that you may have or may be likely to have supporting sons and daughters, children through their revision next year in preparation for the mocks. And they are key. These are key things that we've established with the pupils that we know are evidence-based and are likely to have a great impact positively in making sure that the revision that they do is effective and a useful use of their time. So simple things like putting their phone away during revision, something that avoids the distractions of the always on and notifications, but again, turning that phone off or putting it in a different room. Again and again, I can't stress how importantly enough that time after time, although pupils will often obviously prefer to have their phone with them when they're revising, the quality of that revision does drop and has been proven to drop as the distraction of having that phone becomes very real. So we would always say to the pupils, just do yourself a huge favour, turn the phone off, put it in a different room, and make sure that you can then put all your efforts into your revision and use your time wisely. Obviously, in terms of starting revision, to allow them to have that retrieval aspect of retesting and retrieval, going back to work and checking it through, the earlier they start, the less they have to do all in one block. And again, over time, that long-term memory is really well developed. We'll give an example of a simple organised revision planner that we would suggest that pupils use. But again, try not to spend too much time building the revision planner, making the revision planner. Keep it very, very simple. Spend all the time in high quality revision and just use a revision planner to show days and hours when revision can't be done and other activities are promoted. But to make sure that they therefore leave enough time to make sure that they do the revision that they have to complete. Obviously, going back to the phone idea in terms of a quiet environment, again, all the studies show that the background music is pupils really enjoy having background music. As adults, we enjoy having background music when we're working, but that it is a distraction and it is less effective if you do that. So we do encourage the pupils to try and avoid background music and have a quiet environment. And again, that's sometimes difficult in busy households, but again, we'd look for them to try and find a quiet space, use study sessions at school and revision time at school, after school, but also to find a quiet space at home if that's possible, away from any distractions and background music. And if I could just finish by explaining a simple revision planner that we encourage our pupils to use. Again, there are much more elaborate versions that you may be able to find online, but a simple plan that pupils can use, plan out the sessions, work out when they've got particular tasks. They may have some sporting activities, and we still want obviously to encourage them to have that balance of sporting activities and time away from their studies, but also to try and pick those times where they can really get a good session of revision or home learning, as they still incorporate both into their schedules through the week. So my contact details are there at the bottom left hand of the screen, so please do feel free to contact me at any time. But like I say, I hope we can support those pupils when they return after Christmas, in the build up to the February mocks, and obviously as we approach the summer season. A final technique is one we call interleaving, and again it's just this element of trying to break up the revision so that if a pupil has identified a 2-hour slot for revision with some breaks in there, every time they come to a break, it's about changing the type of revision they're doing, or the unit that they're focusing on, or the whole subject that they're doing, so that they're not just concentrating or massing their practice on